Hello, BookTube. Today is another continuation of my 2020 library tour. Today is part 3 and the finale of the literary, realistic, and general fiction shelf. This shelf right here. So let's get started. First up is An Arrow's Flight by Mark Merlis. I first picked up this book from Book People in the early 2000s. I think my first trip to Book People when I went to tour St. Edward's University. After we toured St. Edward's University's campus, we went down to Book People on 6th Street, where I picked this book up. Although at the time, I didn't quite get on with it the first time I tried the book, but I saw Steve Donahue show it during a shelf tour or something. No, it might have been a Bruttle book haul that he'd end up having a double, and it kind of got me into wanting it again. I donated the first copy of this to the Friends of the Library book sale, so I went ahead and ordered it on Libris. Next is Acts of Worship by Yukio Mishima, a collection of short fiction. I've had this since sometime in high school, and I quite liked the collection. It's been ages since I've read it. I really should have another go at it at some point. And then we have Into by North Morgan. I picked this up about 2 years ago. It's sort of a modern, maybe take at Dancer from the Dance. It's about a late 20s, early 30s something gay man moving to Los Angeles and sort of getting involved in one of the gay scenes. I read it a few years ago and didn't quite get on with it, but I probably should give it another go before deciding to do something with it. And then we have The Last Romeo by Justin Myers. I picked this up this year from Book Depository, and it's about a 30-something gay man whose long-term relationship has ended, and he's basically starting a blog where he would go on a series of dates with men and trying to find that last Romeo, sort of the one. And this is his journey. I didn't particularly care for it because, narratively, the one half of the story really works and the other half it's a bit doesn't. But anyway. Next. I keep saying next and it's probably annoying. Relatively recent pickup, These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerever. Haven't gotten to it yet, so I will hopefully get to this in the not too distant future. But I want to say it's a take on Leopold and Loeb. They were two prep school boys from Chicago who eventually kidnapped and murdered a young boy of their acquaintance. And the trial was one of the first trials of the 20th century. Obviously, the last one was the O.J. Simpson trial, but the Leopold and Loeb case was one of the first ones from the early 20th century. Next is At Swim to Boys by Jamie O'Neill. This is a modern classic of gay literature. I picked this up in San Francisco. I want to say it was the book sale room on San Francisco State University's campus. And There by Tommy Orange. I picked this up from Fabled, the new independent bookstore in Waco. Bought it along with The Great Believers for the America 20 project. And then there is Gutter Boys by Alvin Orloff. This is a gay novel set in the 1970s. I picked it up in San Francisco, and I need to give it another go, but my first reading, I wasn't too terribly impressed. Blue Angel by Francine Prose. Like I've said repeatedly these past few months, this book has haunted me for nearly 20 years. I was a senior in high school, I think, when this came out. Check. And I was somewhere, maybe at a doctor's office, or maybe it was just reading the paper. But at the time, the Waco Tribune and Herald, the newspaper of Waco, used to have book coverage, book reviews, and literary opinion and stuff. They don't anymore, but 20 years ago they did. And yeah, or maybe not actually, more than 20 years now. Well, 20 years now since it came out in 2000. But anyway, so, and I was just struck by the review, and it kind of got me wanting to read the book, and it sort of haunted me ever since. And so this year, when I decided to do the America 20 project, I'm like, it's probably a good excuse to go ahead and pick this book up and finally read it. And very deeply disappointed. It's about a professor of creative writing at a small New England university who has this one bright pupil who he begins to mentor, and she accuses him of sexual harassment, and he is basically driven out of the university on this false charge. Even though, given that we, the reader, see into his head, it's like he kind of, sort of, probably actually did do it, because he did have the hearts for her. So, anyway, so it was infuriating read, because, I mean, yeah. Because, I mean, if you read it a certain way, it's like, yeah, you actually are kind of guilty of what she's accusing you of. I mean, because, I mean, clearly we're seeing that you have the hots for her, but anyway, so I was infuriated, annoyingly and sadly, but anyway, but I might give it another go. I haven't quite decided. I was planning on rereading it this month, but I don't know if I want to, or having a second attempt at it. Next is City of Night by John Ritchie, a classic of gay literature. This is about a male hustler who travels from New York to New Orleans to Los Angeles and cities in between, and really kind of comes into his own and recognizes that, well, for much of the book, he has pretty much been gay for pay. Then he realizes towards the end that he's actually bisexual. I think it's been forever since I've read it, but I think that's what happens. And then we have Night at the Fiestas by Kirsten Valdez-Quade. I read this book about 4 years ago, and then a little bit more recently. I did a try a story challenge in 2016 after having watched Simon Savage do it, which actually wouldn't be a bad idea to try. like another try a story tag. But I just need to find some short fiction. Anyway, but this was one of the books that really jumped out at me, and I reread it like a year or so later, and again, I really liked it, and I really wanted it in my collection, so quite happy to have it. My favorite stories are, I think Nemesia is really good, Mojave Ruts is great, Night at the Fiestas, oh yeah, The Five Wounds, so yeah, it's a really good collection. Next is another book from Fabled, The Lager Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan Stradel. This is about two sisters who are feuding over a famous beer recipe, I think. This book first came to my attention when I first looked at Fable and wanting to buy something from them. This book was soon to be released, and it just really popped out at me, and I eventually picked it up this past month, November, when I decided to buy some more books locally. From Book People, and the first book I picked up from Book People when I first started to buy from them again earlier this year is Lot by Brian Washington. This is a collection of short fiction and his debut. And I really was introduced to Brian Washington through some of his videos on The New Yorker. He has about 2 or 3 videos where he's like talking about topics that interest him and cooking, and those videos are amazing. And finally, Anti-Story, an anthology of experimental fiction, edited by Philip Stevich. This book has had my eye for quite some time, and just recently I decided to pick it up, and hopefully I will get to it pretty soon. So BookTube, that completes the literary, realistic, and general fiction shelf. Next week I will move on to the history shelf, which will take up the whole week, and thinking about like how big history has become. Last year when I did this video, basically I did the history shelves all in one video, and this week it'll probably be longer. And then of course the last 2 weeks of December will be devoted to the science fiction and fantasy shelves, which there's a lot. Still a huge amount of them to go. So new BookTube. I will be back with a tag, and obviously later on tonight with weekly reads, and I'll either have an original tag up sometime today or more than likely on Monday. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.